In Paris, France, now for those of you who are new and may not be aware, President Macron had decided to basically make an executive decision to increase the retirement age from 62 to 64. The French said, no, we are not putting up with that and we're not having it. This is a part of their pension reform. His excuse is that they're not going to have the funds to continue to pay people, so he's going to have to increase the age. Problem is, he didn't get the consent of other politicians, and so they were a little bit angry too. This was more so like an executive order, something that our president would do. And also, of course, the citizens of Paris are not happy about this as well. And they have been protesting for days. I think we are now on day 11. He did issue a rule saying that it was illegal to gather in large groups in an effort to stop those protests. But that hasn't worked. The people in France don't care about his rule, and they are still protesting. And this brings a question in reference to President Macron's leadership. So I want to play this clip here that says France protests fight for the right to retire continues. This was uploaded yesterday, so we're going to go ahead and get into this clip.
Violence, arson, clashes, that's what happened across France as hundreds of protesters took to the streets on Tuesday to detest Emmanuel Macron's pension reform, which raises the retirement age from 62 to 64. Protests descended into chaos in several cities, including in Paris, where protesters lit fires in the historic center of the French capital. The protests were given a new momentum by Macron's government refusal to back down from the reform.
So this is something that's been happening. They're setting things on fire, basically. Notice it says 13,000 police personnel are deployed in France. Like, the protesters are not stopping.
There is every reason to believe that this was an isolated act, and the circumstances and motives behind it are currently under investigation by the judicial police.
Now, France's iconic monument, the Eiffel Tower, also closed its doors to visitors as its staff went on a strike amid a new day of nationwide protests. The protesters marched along railway lines in Paris in the 10th day of the union-coordinated action against the government's pension reforms. You could see striking workers waving burning flares. They invaded and blocked train tracks serving one of Paris's main railway stations.
So this is another thing that is happening now. They have actually started to block off the railroad. So I told you guys that they are disrupting. It's not just commerce. They are disrupting transportation services as well. So we saw the airlines had a factor. We saw the Uber industry there was also hit. And now we also see they're actually blocking the railroad tracks, preventing the trains from going through. Now, some of the train lines have already been canceled anyway, but they're trying to make an abrupt halt in France for every industry.
It has set everyone on fire. We cannot accept that and say that we are in a democracy. When you have more than half of the people in the country against this reform, people are fighting. We can't let this go. And what adds fuel to the fire is the behavior of the government.
Now, in the city of Nantes, the day marked the most serious violence yet of a 3-month revolt against President Macron's reform plan. Protesters lit fires in the western French city. Demonstrators set cars and garbage cans on fire, while others shot fireworks at police.
So the people are actually retaliating against the police. This is what is happening now. Now it has gotten to the point where the police are actually being pushed back by the protesters because there's more protesters than there are police. And this is what I've said before. There's always more of us than there are of them. The French realized that.
Protesters in Nantes earlier blocked access roads to the city, creating 45 kilometers of congestion. Last Thursday saw the most violent clashes yet between protesters and security forces as tensions erupted into pitched battles on the streets of Paris. The police have also been accused of using excessive force, both by protesters and rights bodies, including the Council of Europe. Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin said a total of 13,000 police were deployed during the protest throughout the day, more than ever before. The number, a record, was justified by a major risk to public order.
So the fires have been an ongoing situation, like during the day and during the evening. Okay, and that was just a taste. There's more, because like I said, people are starting to question whether or not President Macron should even keep his position. Maybe it's just best if he just decides to stand down. But the protests have actually ramped up. I want to play this clip here, which says that protests intensify across France over pension reform. This was also uploaded yesterday, and that's what I've been trying to explain. Over the past couple of days, these protests have increased. I think the media, mainstream media, is downplaying some of those numbers. I have had a couple of people that live in France that actually reached out to me and told me that the numbers are actually higher than what mainstream media is saying. I think they're doing that on purpose to keep people calm.
Tonight, fires across France. One protester telling us this is a war. Hundreds of thousands taking to the streets.
And the people still push the police officers back. And that's why I'm telling you, I think the mainstream media, they're actually deflating the numbers of protesters that are out on those streets. Look at the gear that the police officers have. They have shields. I guess we will refer to this as riot gear, but they are protected in such a way to take on large numbers of people. And that's a good point to bring up. One of the reasons that they're pushing back on the increase of the retirement age is because some of the people already have health issues and they haven't even reached 62 yet. So that's something to think about. I've always said this before. I think it's ridiculous. Even here in the US, retirement age 65 years old. I don't think anyone should have to work till they're 65 years old, regardless of what country you live in. I don't think that anyone should have to work past that either. And I've seen people, they will work until they're 70 so that they can have an increase of Social Security. In fact, one of my coworkers did that. She passed 65 and she continued to work until she was 70 so that her Social Security would be higher and so that her pension from MIT would be higher. They don't do the pension thing anymore for newbies. That was more like something you were grandfathered into. But anywho, no one should have to do that. So they're already experiencing health issues and they're wanting them to work longer. So I totally understand where they're coming from.
That's not possible. Cracks may be emerging, though. Paris sanitation workers suspending their weeks-long strike that has left mounds of trash piled high in city streets. Macron's government also signalling an olive branch, saying the president has said that he's ready to meet with the unions once because we respect our institutions. Macron.
So you see what's happening because there was that pressure from notice the pressure came from the outside. The pressure didn't come from the politicians. The pressure came from the people, the activists, the protesters outside of the electoral system. And so now, because they have been protesting for so many days, now he is finally saying he is ready to sit down and meet with some of the unions and come up with some type of negotiation. But mark my words, that would not have happened without the pressure from the activists on the outside.
Increasingly unpopular, despite his re-election last year, looking for a legacy, a battle of wills between the president and his people.
And with that, Keir Simmons joins Top Story tonight from Paris. Keir, we're getting some late word about another strike, and I know you have some new reporting for us.
That's right, Tom. There will be another strike, an 11th day of strikes in April. So that shows you that the protesters are determined to keep going. It's damaging for President Macron. Remember that he is planning in a week's time, just think about this, to travel to France to meet with President Xi. And one of the issues on the agenda, of course, will be the war in Ukraine. So you've got the president of France, one of the most important leaders in Europe, heading to China for those negotiations, while at the same time, he's got all of these disturbances back home. I mean, that
probably not a good idea for President Macron to leave the country right now and go to China. Can you imagine if the protesters are doing this now? Imagine what's going to happen if he actually leaves the country. So I think the thing is now the people have found a way to make their president understand that they actually have the power because they are greater in number. This is what it's all about. This is what it's all about. When the people come together, by the way, are the people in France out in the streets, are they saying, hey, are you on the right or the left? Are they saying that? I don't think so. I think they're just pissed about the increase of the retirement age and the pension. And they said, let's all come together and push back against this.
That's the picture that makes this really kind of challenging on a global scale.
And Keir, going back to some of the images we saw in your report from today and from over the weekend, are the protests so bad that they're disrupting the daily life of Parisians? Social media is now full of these sort of memes, mocking Parisians, if you will, trying to go on with their life, but burning garbage in the streets.
Yeah, I mean, look, but it's a great city, Tom, right? And like all great cities, life continues even while there are these protests, even something close to riots at times taking place in some of the streets. You can see here behind me, life is carrying on.
It's like Grand Theft Auto. If you ever played Grand Theft Auto where there's a vehicle burning in the street and at the same time life just goes on, like there's people walking down the street, going to like a cafe. There's a couple sitting at a table outside of a restaurant. It kind of reminds me of Grand Theft Auto.
This city. Listen, I think the question here, Tom, is this. How much of a challenge is this really for President Macron, who is so powerful? French presidents are so powerful. And are we seeing here Macron maybe beginning to win this fight and a real change in the fabric of French society? Because that's what the protesters think they are fighting over. It's not just about retirement age, they think. They think it's about what France is about.
And finally, Keir, tourism is such a big part of the Parisian economy. Is that being talked about at all? Because if you're anywhere in the world and you're seeing what's happening in Paris right now, you may want to reschedule that trip.
Yeah, you may do. You shouldn't do, because actually these are isolated events here in France and here in Paris. I'll tell you something really interesting, Tom. People have a perception of France as safe. So whenever something like this happens, there can be an impact on tourism, but it doesn't tend to last very long. And they make so much money from tourism here. Frankly, I think that is set to continue.
Okay. So there is more, because like I said, they have intensified these protests. These protests have increased. And I just want to show you a couple of other videos as well. I want to show you what the crowd actually looked like. Now, Steve Hank is saying that there were 1.3 million people in this particular clip. He says in Paris, the French protest against President Macron and his pension reforms have intensified. It is reported that a staggering 1.3 million people have gathered to protest. Macron is toast. Take a look at the scene. So this was March 28th. Just the other day. Look at this. Is it Coachella? It's not Coachella. It's a protest. if there's anyone in the chat that knows French, can you tell people what they're saying? I wish I knew what they were saying. I can't translate it. It's like the French Revolution. Oh, thank you, Stephanie, the national anthem. Okay, thank you for that. It's like the French Revolution is reborn. Like, that's a lot of people, a lot of people. And I really think it might even be more than 1.3 million, just from what I've been hearing from people who are over there. And I want to show you another clip as well, because the firemen also decided to join in. They even have the firemen. It would be interesting if some of the police officers just said, fuck it, I'm joining you guys. So in Paris, firemen joined a team of French protesters to demonstrate against President Macron's pension reform. Macron is toast. So Steve Hank, he keeps saying that Macron is toast. Go ahead and take that poll if you haven't had a chance to do so. Let me know whether or not you think Macron should resign. Cheers to the firefighters. Yeah, buddy. And there's even more. There's another clip that I have. Make sure I'm going to the right one. Oh, yes, the railroad workers. So Steve Hank continues and says, French workers have blocked the railroad tracks of the Gare de Lyon to oppose President Macron's proposed pension reform. This just confirms my schoolboy's theory of history. It just gives one damn thing after another. I told you they seized everything. They said, no train is coming through here. You got to love it. You got to love it. Now, if you didn't have a chance to do so, please remember to take that poll. We'll go ahead and reveal the results at the end of the show. I'm curious to see what you guys think Macron should do. I honestly think he should resign, but don't let that influence your decision. Terry says, I have to work until I'm 67 to get full retirement money. Yikes. Thank you for the super chat, the amazing Blumpkin. Hundreds. Yeah, it's definitely over 1 million people out there. It's over 1 million. I noticed they said that too in one of the videos. Thank you for the super chat, Vegan. Hello, Sabby. I voted no on your poll. So the protesters could bring out the guillotine. And just as Chris Hedges said at Rage Against the War Machine, referencing Alice in Wonderland, off with their heads, LOL. Interesting. Shout out to JB in the chat, says hello. Thank you for the super chat at Kid. Sabby, imagine if Americans did the same to protest for Medicare for all. $25, living wages, and more, we would win our humanity back. This is true. Thank you, Delthea, for the super chat. You should be eligible for a national pension in your 50s. The work week should not exceed 4 days, and the weekday should not exceed 6 hours. I agree with this, Delthea. I agree with this. And thank you for the super chat, Tom. BLM protest in 2020, they called riots. White people in Paris burning garbage, setting vehicles on fire, and attacking police. He calls something close to riots. Am I right? That's a good point, Tom. Although I will say CNN and MSNBC have not been referring to it as close to riots. They've been referring to it as rioting. And they're trying to, I believe, really not cover it that much to begin with because they don't want Americans to start to get ideas. So when they do cover it, they've been doing it in a way that they're demonizing the protesters.